John Updike has been one of America's leading writers for the last 4 decades. His novels, short stories, essays, and poems comprise an illustrious body of work matched by few other writers in this century. At the age of 63, he's just published his 17th novel. It's called In the Beauty of the Lilies, and it follows 4 generations of an American family from 1910 to 1990. John Updike is with me in our Toronto studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
You once said you couldn't bring yourself to do the fakery involved in a historical novel. Why have you finally written one?
Well, if you write long enough, you have to write one of everything, and I thought I would write a family saga, a generational saga, and I had a little experience with an American president called James Buchanan, and I did work him up into kind of a character in a novel. Finally, it took me a long time, but having experienced the fakery then to that degree, I thought I could certainly fake a little 1910 and 1920s, and once I got up to 1932, I would be born, and it would cease to be a historical novel. In a way, it would cease to be a fake, exactly. But it's a little more work. It's a little more work. You try to find the kind of detail that will animate a novel. The history books are so full of other kinds of detail. But I knew people, obviously. I knew my grandfather and people who were alive in this year, so it wasn't as remote as, say, writing about 1410 or the year 610 or anything like that.
If you have to do one of everything, is a bodice ripper in the cards for you?
Next book, you've given me a wonderful idea. I was sort of groping for a subject, and there it is.
Groping, were you?
Groping. They really rip those bodices, don't they? They must have made sort of breakaway bodices in those days.
Are you faking? Is this fakery here, or is
this is fakery?
Knowledge.
I think I'll never do anything but write little autobiographical accounts of nature now.
Maybe that's the safest
Me at the bird
thing.
feeder. John Updike feeds another bird.
A poem. Very nice sounding poem.
Yes.
Maybe a haiku, just as you've named it. Which part of the book did you begin thinking about, first of all?
The earliest part, I think, although it's been a while since I thought about the book, but the research began with 1910. I knew a minister who lost his faith fairly suddenly and then plunged his family into social disaster, was where I began. I even went to Paterson, New Jersey, not a city I'm very well acquainted with, and a city that's changed quite a lot since 1910. Also, it's one of those industrial cities that has all kinds of evidence of prosperity, but by now it's almost gutted. I mean, it almost looks bombed out, Paterson does. So it was fun to walk around and try to reconstruct the Paterson of Clarence Wilmot and his parishioners. And having done that, which wasn't so hard since the action is only a few days long. It's not as if I move through a lot of time. You see, the one scene takes many pages, and then there's a little bit in 1913 where you see him falling and then falling. The 20s were, in a way, harder because I sort of do touch on all the 20s, and we all have some images of them, but when you go back and look at what was news then, I don't know, I just got so involved in recasting the old headlines that maybe I overdid it. I don't know. It's a fun decade, though. Maybe all decades are fun, but certainly the 20s seem especially so.
The book opens with Mary Pickford fainting on a movie set, and meanwhile, in another part of New Jersey, Clarence Wilmot, this minister, who's one of the hero of the early part of the book, is losing his faith. It's a wonderful sort of intersection of paths. Did film replace religion at the core of American life?
That seems to be my thesis, and that the movie theater, and it's true of my youth, the movie theater supplied some of the idealism and inspiration and role models that perhaps a church in its prime should provide. The two institutions in the town of my birth and rearing were very close together, and I kind of associated them together. Indeed, we used to go to the movie theater on Christmas morning to sing carols. Secularization of the church. I wonder if that would be permitted now. Anyway, the town in those far-off innocent era thought nothing of it. And the superintendent of the all this is just coming back to me, by the way, in a rush of memory. The superintendent of the Sunday school at the Lutheran Church was also the man who would lead us in singing Christmas carols, and then Mickey Mouse cartoons would show for an hour, and then we would get a chocolate bar at the door, and then we would go to the town hall and be given another box of candy by the fat town policeman. There were 3 town policemen, an old one, a young one, and a fat one, and the fat one would give us all a box of candy, and that was how Christmas began in Shillington, PA. So This means that the church and the movie theater were mixed up in my mind, and I think in this novel they're mixed up to the extent that the movies, the notion of the moving image penetrates all of my characters, major characters' thoughts, and I suppose it's not giving away too much to say that Clarence Wilmot's granddaughter has faith of her sort, of what she has the kind of faith she needs, and she does actually become a movie star.
Can you say that, can you compare the light of a movie projector to divine light or illumination?
Certainly it is all about light, isn't it? And I guess there's a lot of light imagery inevitably in this book. Clarence, after he leaves the ministry, becomes a movie addict of the silent films which were around in Nickelodeon days. And certainly he feels the place is like a church, including the organist or the piano player down front, and all facing the same direction in the expectancy. And this church works, he sort of thinks at one point, unlike the church he's sadly left.
What causes Clarence to lose his faith?
Well, he's a late Victorian who's read his Darwin, and he's read some Robert Ingersoll. Robert Ingersoll was a militant American atheist, the son of a minister, as so many militant
so
atheists
was Darwin,
are.
right?
Yes, Darwin was, and Darwin indeed trained to be a clergyman, or was headed toward the clergy at one point until he switched over to being a naturalist. And in Origin of the Species, he tries to placate the religious people in his audience by saying he doesn't see why this would really affect anyone's faith. A God who created by this method was as good as a God who created by direct fiat, but of course it doesn't quite wash. In fact, Darwin's worldview is devastating as far as the argument from design goes. Anyway, Clarence reads some Ingersoll to comfort a parishioner, but discovers to the contrary that he agrees with Ingersoll. Ingersoll, when you read him, and I did for this book, talks about liberating the clergy from these old historical barbaric beliefs, but Clarence finds that yes, he is released, but to what? He no longer has a job or status. He's a fallen man.
And after the fall has come upon him, he's required to say a grace, which he finds very hard to deliver right before a meal. And he talks about troubled times, and he asks God to instruct us in thine activating covenant. In these troubled times, we're talking about 1910. Was this a troubled time?
I got some old newspapers. I mean, you know, the magic of microfilm. I went back and read a few papers of that era. I know it seems now a kind of halcyon period. Teddy Roosevelt was in charge of the White House, and there was no World War raging. The horrors of the middle of the century were far away. Yet, no, there was violence and things. It wasn't as well reported in those days. So that, say, a famine in China was a fairly dim and distant headline. Now, a famine in China, we would get the TV images and so on. So, but Clarence is sensitive enough that he finds reading the newspaper a very painful thing, because it's full of atrocity, basically pain, suffering, and evidence that God doesn't give a darn.
And is there evidence of that in every generation? Does every generation think it's living in a troubled time?
I think so, and they also think they're living in a fallen time. I think we all imagine that there was a golden age not so long ago, and we're in sad decline from it, although not too much is made of that in the book. But yes, the notion that news is horrible persists throughout the book, and indeed the book ends with a kind of a newscast. I suggest that the newscast has replaced the movies as a worship center. You turn on the newscast, and again, the moving images. We have become a world of visual simulation addicts, I think, thanks to the movies and then TV in its wake.
Clarence also loses his voice during a sermon, and his wife has to speak for him. I understand this also happened to your grandfather, Hartley Updike, who you've mentioned was a clergyman. How much of Clarence is Hartley?
A lot of it is my idea of Hartley. I suspect that the real Hartley, were he here among us, would say this isn't me at all. But he did leave the ministry and did have voice problems and did die fairly young. That much we know about my paternal grandfather. But my aunt's letters describe him marching the family off to church in a very jubilant and unfallen manner. So I don't know if he ever lost his faith. But he did lose his call. My father once said to me that his father had said he'd never received the call. And my father was who was himself a believer and a deacon, was haunted by this confession. And this moment when the father confesses this failure or weakness to the son kind of permeated my entire upbringing. Somehow my grandfather did fill the house and the Updike name with a sense of failure or desertion, or something sad happened in the past. And this novel perhaps is just my attempt to get at what that sad buried secret was.
In your autobiography, you've written about him as though, well, there were a number of sort of family jokes that surrounded Hartley, that he was a man born tired and a man who was silent in 12 languages.
That was said of him both, and I think both are somewhat implied of my fictional character. Yeah, his wife was a very vital woman from, indeed, the American South, who was full of energy and good cheer and a great giver of dinners. One of the pieces of family lore was that the kids were always told, what was it? It was some set of initials that meant sort of hold back on the food so that the company could eat. And that was another thing that my father remembered. My father had a sister and a brother, and I knew my Aunt Mary fairly well, and together they kind of sketched in a feeling of that household which really existed in Trenton, New Jersey, not in Paterson. One of the troubles with the book was that I wanted to remove it from my own biography or ancestry, so rather than use Trenton, which I'd already written about, I named Paterson. Rather than use southeastern Pennsylvania, I used Delaware.
And now you're telling us that's what you did.
Yes, but it certainly is fiction in that I really did have to make it up and give these people some kind of inner life, find the furniture for them. I almost feel as though I'm maligning my grandfather in a sense, but I never met him, and I just have his pictures. And he does look a little wan, a kind of an elegant but basically wan and faintly defeated looking man. He went into real estate after failing in the ministry, and I think he rather failed in that too, or at least he didn't prosper. My father grew up in a lot of poverty and a sense of financial emergency, which he managed to communicate to all of us who were in his family. He always was running scared from childhood on, my father.
Teddy, who is Clarence's son, has a daughter named Essie, and she has an unshakable belief in God. How does this help her to achieve her big goal of becoming a movie star?
I think it gives her push and energy and enthusiasm. A lot of what we look for in our star entertainers is energy, and I think faith often gives you energy. It can be malign energy, as we see in these various cultists who lead their followers to a grim end, but in her case, it's a positive American force. Many years ago at college, I read Protestantism and the Rise of Capitalism, which by, I think, Max Weber, which very persuasively sets forth the importance of Protestant belief to the rise of capitalism. Enterprise, one of the characters in the book talks to Clarence about how faith gives you the energy to succeed. Clarence becomes a failure. Essie has confidence that God loves her. At one point she describes it like bathwater, that he's everywhere, touching you with his love. And this enables her to take the risks you need to take if you're going to become a movie star, I guess, a media star.
At one point, you point out that her films will survive in a way that Mary Pickford's and some of the great stars of silent film cannot, of course. They've just sort of turned to dust. Does that feel a little shabby to you?
Shabby that they will survive and Mary Pickford won't? I did some research in film history because although I was a moviegoer from youth on, I really didn't know an awful lot about the inside development of the cinematic art, which has always been changing. And one of the things I discovered was that around 1950 they did change the film stock over from the very perishable nitrate mix that they had been using, and that the silent films, I didn't know this either, we've lost worlds of silent film. Most of it has been lost except for the few films that have been transferred onto the new stock. So anyway, Essie offers herself the consolation, and she's not so different from an author in this, I confess, that even though her body will perish and her life will end, nevertheless, this image of her that is being recorded in these moments on the film set will last, or potentially, she is potentially immortal as long as somebody has a projector and the will to show the films, just as an author will live again if anybody picks the book down off the shelf and reads it.
Or if his book or his novel becomes a movie, such as your novel, The Witches of Eastwick, did.
Well, it did, but I would rather remain, if I had to choose a bit between the book lasting and the movie lasting, I'm afraid I would selfishly opt for the book. I thought the movie began kind of well and then fell apart slowly. They couldn't really cope with the tragic and rather grim side of my novel. They deleted the fact, in brief, that the three witches kill a fourth witch because she seems to be running off with their beau, who is, in a way, the devil.
Alma gets a lot of bad girl roles. Does the audience see through the punishment that she gets on the screen?
My thought was, in trying to imagine her film career, was that she was one of those 50s stars, like James Dean, who expressed the kind of smoldering subterranean psyche of the 50s, and that she is a kind of a dirty girl, a bad girl, right from the wrong side of the tracks, and she's a brunette and not a blonde. And yes, I did imagine her beginning in kind of noirish grade B films, and then developing more persona as her career extends. And she's tough enough and has faith enough to have several lives as a movie actress, so she becomes a kind of Doris Day. Starring in Cream Cheese and Caviar with Paul Newman. Doris Day, as her autobiography says, one of her nicknames was it Cream Cheese? I think it was. Anyway, that was the association there, and I'm a great Doris Day fan, so I was happy to see my bad girl.
Are you really a great Doris Day fan?
Actually her singing too.
I love her singing. Yeah.
She really can sing, really could sing. And I thought as an actress she was very durable and did manage to be herself. I think a lot of the thing about becoming an actress or a movie star of any sex, of either sex, is relaxing into your real self, because unlike a stage performance, you can't really fake it. The camera seeks you out, and if you're not, and Laurence Olivier had some trouble adjusting to the kind of understated, laid-back quality of film acting. So anyway, Doris Day has that quality. I think she's always herself. She's a strong personality. She's bouncy. You may think I'm foolish to love Doris Day, but you got to love somebody.
I do love her voice. I really do. I haven't made a study of her film yet, but that awaits me.
You know, I was, as you were mentioning before we came on the air, I recently wrote about Lana Turner at the New Yorker's request. I don't hop to every request they make because they're full of requests these days, but I did respond to the Lana Turner because I thought there was something more to say about her. She'd been kind of dismissed when she died. She died last year, and she did not get the big obituaries. When you sit down with the videos and I watched about 8 or 9 of these from her early career on. It's a shock. You almost want to cry that this person is dead, because what other people in history can live again the way these old film stars can when you see them? There they are, young and walking around and no wrinkles, and then you see them age, and then suddenly in real life, in real time, they're dead. So Essie's aspiration to immortality, there's something in it, certainly, that they are preserved in a way most of us are not preserved.
I'm speaking with the American novelist John Updike, who's just published his new novel, In the Beauty of the Lilies. You achieved great popularity as a writer early in your career, and you've sustained it. And you've also had your private life exposed to strangers. To some degree, you've exposed it to strangers, too. Do you feel as though you've lived the life of a film star at times?
There is a lot more sort of media stuff in being an author than there was when I began, and like Essie, I have had the experience of being photographed plenty, and of having the spotlight on you, and it's gratifying to a degree and also sort of annihilating to another degree. You develop a persona which threatens to take over and oust whatever the real persona was that put you there in the first place. I didn't enter into, unlike, say, Norman Mailer, I didn't enter into great fame with a first novel or anything. I kind of crept into fame, if that's what I have. I was a New Yorker contributor of light verse, some short stories. It took me a while to test myself with writing a novel, so that if I've achieved the limelight, I sort of slithered into it rather than jumped into it. And I think that's healthy, probably. It's very hard to begin big. A tendency to go downhill is fairly irresistible.
The last part of your story deals with Clark, who is Alma's son. He's a failed producer, he's a ski bum, he joins a religious sect, which is very similar to the Branch Davidians. Is he searching for the faith that his great-grandfather lost?
Perhaps in a way. He certainly is aware that his mother did not give him any of the standard church-going faith that she had had the benefit of. Now, she kind of outgrows it, as many straight-laced small-town children do, but it had been there, and in some ways at the root of her self-confidence, and even her capacity for joy is in some way related, I suggest, to this early training, the early belief that there is a God who loves you. And Clark doesn't get that, and he's probably sore about it. In fact, I think he's secretly sore about a lot of things. Hard to have a famous person for a parent. And so when, by chance, and everything he does is kind of by chance, he falls into the grip of a fundamentalist leader called Jesse Smith, he is willing to fall. He's willing to go because his life hasn't produced any other answers. Why not try this one?
Is Jesse Smith proof that religion has become a dangerous force in American life?
It probably was always a dangerous force. There have always been bizarre religious sects in America, as I suppose many other places. But it's a utopian country, meant to be founded as a utopia. The Puritans thought they would create a utopia here, and so the utopian impulse, which also goes with the impulse to get away from the established civilization. Now, it's one thing to cross the Atlantic, and you can indeed get away, as we showed, but in present-day America, it's increasingly hard to isolate yourself, I think, like the Mormons did. They kept going, and finally came to the Great Salt Lake, and for some decades at least, they were safe from governmental interference. But to make that kind of pocket of holy living now is difficult, and I suppose Jesse and his followers feel the stress. At least he feels very intruded upon by the U.S. government and says so. And he's one of those religious leaders who has demonized the government, who has demonized, in a sense, the social contract. So naturally some conflict. And he's kind of gun crazy, which David Koresh also was. I'm not sure all these religious leaders are gun crazy, but we also have in the United States assassinations in abortion bureaus now. There's a young man being tried right now in Boston for having shot two attractive young women who were at the desks of an abortion clinic. So the religious impulse, to make a short answer of it, yes, can be murderous. Too much faith is a bad thing, I think my book says. Mm-hmm. A little faith is necessary. Too much is crazy and dangerous.
Is that why you've chosen Episcopalianism?
It does seem to be nice for me. Its creedal demands are not excessive. Its image of gentility is personally flattering. And it's fairly close to the Lutheran Church, which is what I was raised in. Also, my present wife is Episcopalian, and I joined in part to be closer to her. But in many ways, I think it's been a good fit.
John Updike, you started out with plans to be a visual artist, and you became an extraordinarily productive writer. Have you ever wondered about the road that you didn't take?
I went to college expecting still to be a cartoonist. I got onto the Harvard Lampoon. People have different reasons for going to Harvard. Mine was rather odd. I went in part because the Harvard Lampoon was the most distinguished college humor magazine. I think even the category of college humor magazine is now long passé, but it was still pretty lively in the late 40s, and the Lampoon was the best, and I went and wanted to get onto it, and I got onto it as a cartoonist because I could, to some extent, draw, and I drew throughout college, but it was also during college that I discovered I did have some aptitude for writing, and by the time I got out, I think I knew that if I was going to make any kind of creative career for myself, it would be in writing. Writing, you can kind of cartoon in writing, but in a way you can't write in cartooning. I think the writer can swallow the cartoonist in a way the cartoonist couldn't have ever swallowed the writer. So in a way I've had the best of all these worlds.
It's a great pleasure to talk to you. I certainly look forward to the Bodice River.
I can hardly wait myself.
Thank you very much. John Updike, his latest novel is called In the Beauty of the Lilies, and it's published by Knopf.